This is Join Us in France, episode 203. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France, its many quirks, its history, its language, and of course, destinations in France you want to learn about because hopefully you'll be visiting soon. On today's episode, I talk with Elise about the Château de Vincennes, a great day trip from Paris and a wonderful place to visit if you've been to Paris several times or if you want to see something that's new to you and off the beaten track a little bit. Did you check out the new Join Us in France website yet? I'm seeing a huge boost in traffic and shares also, and I think that's because I put the work in and improved it a lot, and you guys are reacting really positively to it. That makes me very, very happy. For show notes and photos on this episode, you can go to joinusinfrance.com/203, the number 203, and you can use the share button right there also. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest with zero stress, because Elise is doing all the stressing. I just rented a luxury Mercedes van for the tour. Ouch, that was really expensive, but we'll be seeing the Dordogne in style. I'll post new tour dates on addictedtofrance.com soon, I hope. But for now, this one is sold out, and I'll tell you about new dates on the podcast when they are ready. Join Us in France needs your support, since you can't come on a tour. To see all the ways you can support the show, visit joinusinfrance.com/support. Hello, Elise.
Hi, Annie.
How are you?
I'm fine.
We are talking about Vincennes, le Château de Vincennes.
Le Château de Vincennes.
How would you even say that in English?
The Castle of Vincennes.
Vincennes. Okay.
Yeah, you'd have to say it that way because there's no other way of saying it. I don't think anyway,
Can I tell you something really silly that happened recently? I don't know when we're going to release this thing, but somebody really stupid was visiting the Château de Chambord.
Yeah.
In the Loire-Vallée.
Yeah.
Recently, I think it was 2 days ago. And, in those chateaux now, they build a small fire in the fireplaces in the winter. It's always a small one, but,
You mean they do it now for visitors?
Yeah, for visitors.
I've never visited them in the winter, so I don't know.
It's nicer because there's a fire, a real fire going, whatever. Some idiot tourist, and they don't say who the person was, what nationality, or it could have been a French person. We don't know. There were logs stored about 20 meters away. Big old logs, like 1 meter long logs. And the guy went and grabbed logs and put 10 logs in that fire, which overheated the conduit and started fire higher up.
No.
So the firemen came and stopped it right away. And of course, they're prosecuting the person because if it's not your house, don't touch the fireplace. Like, hello. So I don't know how much longer they're going to allow little, fires to be real fires.
I didn't know that they ever did that. I've only visited all of those castles in nicer weather.
Yeah.
So I have never had that happen.
They do, but I don't know if they will.
Me.
Anyway, that was just a complete aside. It was in another chateau, but
okay,
chateau.
talk about chateaux.
Yeah, Vincennes.
This is the reason I wanted to talk about the Château de Vincennes is because we're always looking for things for people to do and places to visit if they've already been to Paris.
Yeah.
And they want to see more things that are really interesting.
Right. This would not be something for a first-time visitor
unless
to Paris.
You're totally a fanatic of castles, particularly fortified castles, because that is in fact what this is.
Yeah.
But this is it has been recently, and it's also important to know that it's only been since 2007 that it is open to the public.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Because I'll back up. Okay.
Okay.
The Vincennes is a huge park that is on the eastern edge of Paris. When you take the number 1 metro line, which is the metro line that runs directly east-west, you can see that on any of the maps of Paris, it ends at Vincennes.
Right.
There are a couple of other metro lines and lots of buses that go there. But when you get to the eastern edge of Paris, the Bois de Vincennes, which is a huge, huge, huge park, not a garden.
It's woods.
It's a park. It has a zoological park in it.
Right.
It has all kinds of other things. It's enormous. In fact, it is the remnant of what was an enormous forest that was the eastern boundary of Paris in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Paris ended with walls right before this enormous forest. And what is left of it, which is still something you drive through. I mean, it's got a really big zoo and it's got all the lakes and it's got all kinds of things. So this is where it's situated, just so that people understand where it's situated, because you can get there by public transportation. But if by some chance you happen to be driving, you can also get there easily, and there are parking areas right nearby. Now, that is the park. The chateau is, in fact, a fortified castle surrounded by walls that covers approximately 12 hectares right now. And it was originally built starting in the 1100s by the king of France, which, of course, at that time was not a very big kingdom, as a hunting lodge, because it was in the countryside outside of what Paris was, which of course was much smaller and surrounded by walls. And that was Philippe Auguste, who is very famous because he built a lot of the walls that encircled Paris. And when you go into the Marais, for instance, you can go see a piece of his wall. If you go under the Louvre, you still see a piece of his wall. So he was a builder. He was a big builder. And
protector.
He's a protector. And so the very first thing that was there was this small hunting lodge, which is actually the same thing as Versailles. Versailles started as a hunting lodge.
On the opposite side of Paris, Versailles.
On the opposite side, right.
Yeah.
And so what happened was that starting in the 1300s, they expanded it and turned it into what is called a fortified castle. So we're not talking about the chateaus, which are very beautiful, which are usually, not surrounded by lots of walls. This is still a time period where everybody was worried about being invaded and being attacked. And so they built this fortified castle with a huge dungeon. And the dungeon...
Which is normal. I mean, the dungeon or the keep or...
The keep, right? It is, interestingly to know, it is the tallest dungeon in France.
Huh.
It's 52 meters high.
Oh, that's pretty tall. Is it still there?
It's still there. And it's part of what they've renovated. And I've been there twice to visit it. Once by pure curiosity, because somebody had said to me there was a fortified castle that was in Paris, because now it's technically inside Paris. And the second time was because I wanted to go back and see more details.
Is it before Créteil or after Créteil?
Créteil, I don't know.
No, Créteil is a little bit more south. Sorry, never mind.
It's inside... It is part of the 12th arrondissement.
Okay. So it's in Paris proper now.
After you get past, if you walked past the grounds of the castle and halfway into the park, you're in the suburbs of Paris. And one of the things I was reading about the other day when I was preparing some of these notes is that even though the castle itself is considered to be a monument that belongs to Paris, Paris and the suburb town of Vincennes are fighting over who pays what. Typical administrative problems, right? Like, I'll take credit for having it, but you'd pay the taxes on it,
Just don't send me the bill.
just don't send me the bill. No. So, but anyway, so the history of this place, though, is really absolutely fascinating. So this really goes way back, of course, to the 1200s and the 1300s. But the big important work that was done on it was done by the king named Charles V. And Charles V, who didn't like having to live on the Ile de la Cité,
and
who considered the Louvre at that time to be a dungeon itself, he went and decided that he wanted to make the Château of Vincennes into a royal residence.
Okay, that's funny because the Louvre doesn't have a dungeon, whereas Vincennes does.
Yes, whereas Vincennes does, right. But the original stuff is no longer there in the Louvre. They destroyed it. So at the end of the 14th century, he modernized what had been built 200 years before. Mm-hmm. So we can imagine what that modernization was actually like. Mm-hmm. But what I didn't know, and this is why it's even more interesting just in terms of its history, is that one of the reasons it was modernized so that he could live in it, and this is we're still talking about something that was outside of what Paris was, so it was kind of like going to the countryside but not going too far away,
right?
Was that the crown of thorns was originally there.
Oh?
The crown of thorns that was brought back to France to be put into the Sainte-Chapelle was placed temporarily in the castle of Vincennes while they were finishing the construction of the Sainte-Chapelle.
Okay.
And then what happened was that
But that's Louis XI.
That was Louis XI.
Right.
And then what happened was when they took the crown of thorns to the Sainte-Chapelle, which we know of on the Ile de la Cité,
right,
they negotiated so that a small piece was left there as it was being modernized. And there is, in fact, a chapel, or it's actually bigger to me than a chapel, because it's actually bigger than the Sainte-Chapelle. It looks to me to be bigger than the Sainte-Chapelle. It's still called the Sainte-Chapelle, but it's called the Sainte-Chapelle of Vincennes. And inside is a piece of the crown of thorns.
That you can see?
It's in a reliquary box, so it's kind of hard to actually see it.
You have to have imagination.
You have to have imagination. Yeah. But they purposely built this chapel or small church, butted up against one of the ramparts of the fortified castle to house this after it was taken and put into the Sainte-Chapelle in the city center.
Interesting.
So
another church you have to go visit.
Another church you have to go visit. Now, just know that it was recently renovated.
Okay. The whole thing or just the church?
The whole thing.
Okay.
Well, parts of it are the original structure, but the church itself seems much more renovated than a lot of the rest of what you can go see.
Okay.
And the windows, I'm not even sure anymore. I think they're old, but not as ancient.
So it's not Gothic style, is it?
It's Gothic style.
Okay.
But it was renovated in the 19th century and then re-renovated just in the recent past. So a little bit like with Notre Dame, parts of it are visibly renovated. Yeah. Parts of it are not, but it's definitely Gothic style.
Okay.
It's definitely still Gothic style.
So it's got the big stained glass windows and all that.
It's got the big stained glass windows, but they're not as ancient, obviously, as the ones in Sainte-Chapelle because it was renovated. And because part of the windows were, in fact, destroyed in the 19th and 20th century by the various wars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened was that by the time we get to the early 1600s, which is the 17th century, and we get to the King Louis XIII. It's a king we've talked about a lot in a couple of the podcasts because he was the son of Maria de Medici, which is connected to the Garden of Luxembourg. He was the son of Henry IV. He was brought up there. I didn't even know that. His first 10 years.
So he was raised?
He was raised there. It was considered to be a royal residence. He was taken around to the others. He's the one that eventually took the hunting lodge in Versailles and turned it into something bigger, which of course was then made into the enormous Versailles we know by his son Louis XIV.
Yeah.
But he spent a good part of his childhood in the royal residence of Vincennes, and it became the third most important royal residence. This is really fairly late because we're talking about 16th and 17th century. After Versailles and Fontainebleau. So it's fallen into disuse in a sort of strange way afterwards. What I didn't know also is that it was expanded by his son, Louis XIV, who eventually, of course, went and lived in Versailles and then gave up on all these other castles. And Louis XIV asked the architect Louveau, who was working on the big Versailles.
Louveau?
Le Vaux, V-A-U.
Le Vaux. Okay.
Yeah, and then his garden designer, Le Neutre.
Yes.
They both worked on designing the gardens and grounds of the Castle of Vincennes. But what happened was that once Louis XIV centralized everything in Versailles, people stopped using it as a royal residence. It was abandoned, basically.
Can you imagine?
It was basically abandoned.
That's so sad.
And so this is Louis XIV went to Versailles. Louis XV lived in the Château of Vincennes. They say only for a few months while something was being worked on.
Right.
Louis XVI never went there. And this is, when you think of where it is now, it's hard to imagine that it was considered to be some place to go to, because it's kind
not
of
that
like
far.
It's like
You hop on the metro.
You hop on the metro.
I mean,
and
it's at the end of the line, so it would probably take you, 30 minutes on the metro?
It depends on where you are. If you start at Châtelet, it's probably 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's not that far.
It's not that far.
The metro has made it...
it's weird when you think about how 300 years ago, that was still forest, and it was still where they had the deer and the boar and the, I guess they still do, but it was where they went to go hunting, So
they had a bunch of forests around Paris.
They had lots
hunting.
of forests, and of course they still do have lots of forests. So guess what happens? By the time we get to Louis XV, since it is no longer being used as a royal residence, what do you do with a walled, fortified castle that has a big dungeon?
Military.
Almost. Prison.
Prison.
Here we go. So the dungeon is turned into a prison, but it's a prison for upper class only.
I see.
Okay.
You have to be a classy prisoner.
You have to be a classy prisoner. So one of the first people to be put in prison there is Fouquet.
Fouquet. Wait. Fouquet. Who was that?
Fouquet was
I know the name.
He was the Minister of Finance. Under Louis XIV.
The thief.
The thief.
Yes.
The man who had more money than the king.
Yes.
And who had his goods, his Vaux-le-Vicomte is his palace and everything.
Yes.
He was put into the prison there. Eventually, he was transferred somewhere else, but it became what is known as the royal prison.
The royal prison.
The royal prison.
Of course.
Lots of people were there. There was a Duke of Beaufort. I'm not sure what he did, but he was
bad cheese.
But no. He was sent there. And so they did not destroy the building. And what is absolutely fascinating, and all of this I didn't know until just doing all of this research, is that after that, they took part of the building. You can still see the entire walls around it. All of it's been very carefully renovated. You can go into the castle. They took a big part of the structure and they turned it into a porcelain factory in the 18th century.
Okay, that sounds better than a prison.
And it became known as the manufacture of Vincennes.
Okay.
Which eventually became the manufacture de Sèvres.
Okay.
Which is very, very, very famous as being one of the two royal porcelain factories that still produces porcelain, except that it's no longer in the castle. They moved. They moved out. Okay. In the end of the 18th century, this is getting me excited because it's so much fun. 3 incredibly prestigious and interesting people were temporarily, for a short time, made prisoners there because the dungeon stayed prison. Voltaire.
Oh, Voltaire was in prison so many times, so many places. I love him.
Voltaire, who of course was in prison for claiming that people should be atheists, and because he was a Republican at a time when you were, it was not cool to say that you didn't believe in monarchy and kings.
I did an episode about Voltaire. I can't remember the number, but if you search "Join Us in France," you'll find the whole Voltaire story.
Right. Diderot, who is a great intellectual. Who wrote wonderful books about everything. He was also in prison there for a short time. First encyclopedia. And a notorious person, the Marquis de Sade. The Marquis de Sade spent...
Now this gets exciting.
6 years there.
6 years?
Yeah, he spent 6 years there.
Well, it was an upper-class prison.
It was an upper-class prison, and I think most people know that he was there for what would have to be called his sadistic tendencies.
Offense à la morale.
Yes. And of course...
Offense to morality.
That was where he wrote his books.
Ah.
Now, honestly...
I haven't read his books.
I've read a couple of... Well, I've read some extracts, and first of all, it's written in like 18th century French.
Yeah.
It's apparently a little bit more interesting and more intellectual than what most people would imagine, but it still is.
What do you mean? It's not 50 Shades of Grey?
No, it's much more graphic than that. But it's much more of a philosophy of libertinage and anarchism. He was basically an anarchist, the Marquis de Sade. I do not know, to be honest. I didn't look to see if those were the last 6 years of his life or not. I don't really know. I don't know, and if they weren't, then he was transferred somewhere else. But
interesting.
Into the middle of the 19th century, it was kept as a prison. The dungeon was kept as a prison. So it was a prison all through the Revolution. It was a prison with all of the changes of the monarchy, Napoleon. Napoleon made it into a prison again. And the rest of the structure, which includes the other buildings inside these 12 hectares, were turned into an arsenal.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
And it was in under Napoleon, just when Napoleon was starting to take power, he turned the entire building with the walls, the dungeon, everything, over to the army. And it is still the property of the army. Technically, it is actually part of the ministry of the army that runs it. However, because it was abandoned at the end of the 19th century, part of it was starting to fall into ruin. And then what happened was Viollet le Duc, good old Viollet le Duc,
yes,
he was asked to restore the chapel,
okay,
which is the Sainte-Chapelle de Vincennes,
yeah,
and the dungeon,
okay,
and that was done pretty much by the 1880s. I love these. This is wonderful. This is like people stuff. In 1917, it was a place of execution. 1917, World War I.
Yeah.
The spy, Mata Hari, was executed there.
Oh.
You know, she was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the only woman spy to ever be executed, at least in World War I.
Yeah.
And because it was property of the army, this is where they took people who were convicted of treason.
Did they shoot her? Or
Yeah, they shot her.
They shot her.
Yeah, they shot her. She was killed.
Yeah, because I didn't think the guillotine was still working
No,
then.
she was killed by a firing squad. During World War II, the very short time that France was able to fight against the Germans, it was turned into the headquarters of the French army.
Okay.
And in 1944, it was taken over by the SS. And what happened was that the Germans, particularly the SS, did something there that they did in a lot of other places in France. As they were being forced out, going back towards Germany, they set fire to much of the structure inside, because, of course, there was a lot of carpentry dating from the Middle Ages and everything.
The roof has to be held up by timber. I mean,
it wasn't bombed.
Okay.
But it was destroyed to a certain extent.
By fire.
Right, but by fire. But what happened was that starting after World War II, a decision was made to redo the royal apartments and to put it back into a state that people could actually visit it, because it is actually one of the most prestigious and one of the oldest royal residences left in France. And so it was a combination of money from the Department of the Army and the Ministry of Culture that spent years and years and years of working on it. And it was reopened to the public, because part of it is still controlled by the army. And when you go in through the main huge gates, because it's vast inside, you see that there's a part when you go in the main gates.
So is there like a drawbridge?
There's a drawbridge. There's a dungeon. What they've done is...
So they have all the accoutrements of a medieval fortification type things.
In several of the rooms.
I'm going to have to look at pictures.
And there's a wonderful audio guide. So that when you go from room to room, you have an idea. For instance, they show you the study that was used by Charles V. It was a tiny little room. It was one of these very small rooms that just had two little windows looking out. They said that it was...
it's easier to keep warm.
It's easier to keep warm. And also, apparently, that's what he wanted. He wanted a kind of like a little cozy corner room with some books to look out. So it has been reopened to the public since 2007. They've still been doing some work on it. Part of the entire structure is, in fact, still owned by the army. But when you go in the main gates, you get out of the metro or you take a bus. I've done once by metro, once by bus. You get out, you walk around the corner, you enter these massive gates that are in the ramparts. You walk in because there's a lot of, space inside. You go in a little bit, and then off to your right is the actual fortified medieval castle with a dungeon. So you go across a keep, you go across a
drawbridge.
A drawbridge that was over a moat, because there was actually a moat there. And the moat was used all through the Middle Ages. Now, of course, there is no water in it. And
even then, most of them never had any water.
No, but this one
I don't know about that one.
Did.
Okay.
And apparently the water drained into a lake that was in the forest there.
Yeah, sometimes moats had water, but that was unusual.
Right. And then you visit the castle, and it is really fascinating because, first of all, I just found it incredibly fun to know that there was a fortified castle in Paris. It's right there. And then you go into the dungeon and you can work your way up, and you go into some of the more public rooms of what was, of course, a medieval fortified castle. So it's a really fun place to visit. And then you go out of the castle, and across the way is the chapel. And
do they let you climb around the walls? I mean, like
climb on the walls?
Well, the fortification wall, can you walk on top of it?
No, you can't. It's not like in Carcassonne.
Okay.
There's, as far as I know, I don't know if there are, it's not a double wall, I don't believe.
Yeah, but even a single wall, but there was way for people to walk up there.
I don't think so. I'm not 100% sure, but part of it is, I think, because it is still basically controlled by the army. So there's a part of the grounds inside the enormous ramparts that is off limits to the public, because it is still controlled. You see some equipment that's army equipment and stuff like that. Excuse me. But it's a really fun thing to do, and it's fun for children because they have activities for children inside the fortified castle. And you can
probably in French.
Probably, although right now most of the places in Paris are making an effort to have things available, and the audio guide is also available in English and probably English and Spanish as well.
Yeah.
But when I was there, there was a display and some music going on. There were some musicians.
So were you there in the summer?
I was there once in the summer and once in the springtime. And it was really a lot of fun.
So it's worth looking up to see if they have specific activities for young kids.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Because they also took one of the public rooms, well, I'm calling it a public rooms, one of the reception rooms that were one of the medieval reception rooms. And if I remember correctly, it may just be certain times of the year or weekends, they have musicians, they have puppet shows, they have things like that. So it's very lively for that reason. And I've talked to a couple of people since then who also were really pleased by discovering it. So that is why I really wanted to talk about it.
It sounds like fun, because medieval architecture, especially defensive architecture, you see it a lot outside of Paris. Right. You see it when you visit the Southwest.
Exactly.
You see it when even the Loire Valley, it's not defensive medieval castles. It's pretty castles.
It's pretty Renaissance castles.
Right. It's not the same. Right. So that's really interesting that you can go see that in Paris. Because if you tell me I want to see defensive medieval castle, I'm going to tell you, well, go to Carcassonne. Or,
I want to see a dungeon.
Go see there's lots of places in the Southwest where you can go see that sort of thing, but I didn't realize.
So we have Carcassonne, which of course everybody has probably heard about by now. I had talked a little bit about Pau, which is also a pretty much fortified and then made into Renaissance castle.
Yeah.
But here we are. It is the only one in Paris. It is the tallest dungeon still standing anywhere.
Yeah, dungeons are interesting because the word dungeon in French has taken on this connotation of a dark, awful place.
Right.
But actually, it was the keep. It was the place where you would keep your armament, your food storage. It was always right in the center. It's the best defended. That's not good English, is it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
The area of the castle that was defended the best.
That's right.
Sometimes it included some bedrooms.
Yes.
Just in
because
case.
Just in case they would
Just
go
in
hide
case,
there.
Yeah, they could go hide there. So it was really an interesting idea to have this dungeon. But if you ask most French people today, they will tell you that a dungeon is a dark, awful place.
Well, that's what most Americans and English-speaking
is it
people...
the same
Yeah,
in
they
English
think
too?
that a dungeon is just for torture and prisoners, where it was not at all. It was
No,
not
that's
the
not at
time.
all what it means. It's it's the safe place.
I was going to say something, and now I just...
You lost it.
I just totally lost it. It had something to do with dungeons and...
Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons. No, it wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, yes. That made me think about the Bastille. Talking about prisons. Talking about the fact that they turned it into a prison, but you're absolutely right. A dungeon was not a prison. That's not what its initial function was. And of course, the problem with the Bastille is that there's nothing left.
Right. Bastille,
there's nothing left to see.
There's just a marker. They destroyed it.
They destroyed it.
They meant it.
But that one was that was a fortified
We also
prison.
did an episode on the Bastille,
Yes.
and I can't remember the number, but if you go to joinusinfrance.com, you can search for Bastille, and you'll come up with a whole episode where Elise tells us the whole story of the Bastille and what happened there.
And as far as I know, and I may be wrong, but I think that this was, except for the original, most primitive Louvre, which was really from like about the year 1000. This was the only totally fortified castle that ever stood as a structure in Paris.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it really is interesting. And of
Wonderful.
course, I love the idea that it's like when you go there now, I love the neighborhood, by the way, around there. It's just a really cool neighborhood to be in. But it's like, oh my God, this was the countryside. Wow.
Now it's a city,
It's
right?
the city.
It's the city. Yeah, and it's probably one of the nicer neighborhoods to live in.
Yes.
Yeah, in
it's
Paris.
a nice neighborhood to live in.
Yeah. Well, Paris.
That's Paris.
Lots of good places.
Lots of nice places to live in Paris.
Thank you so much, Elise. That was really
you're quite
informative. Now I've got to add it to my list.
Yeah, got to add it to the list.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Kathleen Kirscher, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. I'm all the way to 124 patrons for a goal of 200 patrons. Let's push forward, listeners. If you wouldn't miss that $5 terribly much, I'll put your donation to good use. To support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/join us, and that's Patreon. Let me tell you a little about something about the new website. Like I said last week, the information is a lot better organized than it used to be. The search function has also been improved. There are 4 types of pages on the new site. Well, there's more than that, but for each episode, there might be 4 types of pages. First is the episode page. This is an introduction to tell you what the episode is all about. In that introduction, I tried to answer the question, why should you read or listen, and what will you get from it? It's very short, usually around 300 words. Then there's the show notes page. This is a longer description of what we talked about, sometimes with timestamps, so you can jump right to that if you wish. And it's around 1,000 words. It may or may not have pictures. Number 3 is transcript and photos. Now, I don't have transcripts for many episodes because transcribing, it takes a long time, and those are long conversations. So I'll see if the ones that exist already get clicked on, enough before I keep doing more, because it's just a lot of work. I usually put more photos on the transcript pages just to break things up, because they are really long. They're often 15,000 words. And the 4th page type that you'll find is guest notes. When I do a trip report, some of the guests send me their notes. That's usually, the chronology of their trip. They list the hotels, the restaurant, etc. Those are really interesting to look at if you are planning on visiting the same area. So if I have them, I put them on the site verbatim. So, when you search for an episode or a keyword, the site will return results from any of those 4 page types. If you want to see the shorter version or the longer version, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll see buttons to get to those related pages. It's pretty nifty. On the previous site, I got carried away with all the photos. I was like, the mother who takes the camera to their kid's first soccer game and takes 1,000 pictures. But then you take enough photo pictures of your kids playing sports and you learn to restrain yourself. I'm at that same point with the site. I only put up a few great photos. The quality has improved a lot. So if you go back and listen to the old episodes, which a lot of you do, and I said, I'll put a picture of this or that on the website, and you go check out the website and you don't find the photos, well, I may have removed it. If you really, really want it, you can email me. But I'm being a lot more careful with the pictures I put up. And also, I'm getting back into Pinterest. My friend Chris Christensen from the Amateur Traveler podcast says that a lot of people are finding his show on Pinterest because it's a really good place to look for inspiration for travel. So I decided to give it an honest effort with this new site and all. So if you're into Pinterest, please follow me there. Search for Join Us in France Travel Podcast and Tours. And that's the end, not A-N-D, the other one. What do you call that letter? I don't know what you call that letter. I will create a board for every destination and interest that already exists on the website. Eventually, I'll get to create all of those boards because creating all of those pins takes time. The one I worked on the day before yesterday is called First Time in Paris Travel Tips. I asked for help on the Facebook group and several of you have volunteered to help me pin things to this board. Not necessarily pin my stuff, but pin other people's stuff because that's how Pinterest works. Thank you so much, ladies. I would love more help, so email Annie@joinusinfrance.com if you'd like to help me curate great Pinterest pins about travel to France. And if you're not on Pinterest and you find a great article about France, send me the link, I'll add it. If you know somebody who's going to be visiting France soon, tell them about the show. There are many ways to listen to this podcast. They will find it on their smartphone or tablet or using a podcast app or browsing to joinusinfrance.com on their computer or even asking their smart speaker to play the show. So lots and lots of ways to listen to the podcast. To connect with me, email Annie@joinusinfrance.com or leave a message at 1-801-806-1015. You can also ask to join the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook. And when you do, please answer the question so I know you're not a spammer. And don't just answer yes or no because spammers, they do that. They know how to say yes or no. I can't tell you how often I've woken up to alerts on my phone that the Illuminati or some crazy person who has some make fast money now has spammed the group. We get gurus, we get all sorts of crap. And it's usually by the time I wake up, French time, because that's when the Americans are all up while I'm sleeping. That's really annoying. So, I sometimes say Facebook is the bane of my existence, but on the other hand, when I ask for feedback on the group, and if I ask for help with this or that, the latest one was the Pinterest thing, you guys always come through. So it's wonderful as well. So make it clear that you are a real person when you answer the questions. So I know you're not a sleazeball. Have a great week of trip planning, and I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2018 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.